Hi, everybody. I'm Ronan Warlord Magni, and thank you all for coming on the next installment of my Newb to Warlord series. Today, we're going to learn about advanced Florentine fighting. I have fake.
I'm Warlord Magni.
Oh my god, shut up. Squire Sean, and I'm going to hit very hard.
Oh, man.
Okay, so this is more of an advanced class. It's going to build on a lot of the material that I've taught throughout my entire series, and go deeper in depth into Florentine compared to like the basics class. So first off, like the things that I'll be talking about is I'll be comparing advanced versus basic concepts, then talking about the key concepts that you should really have a good understanding on when it comes to fighting Florentine in a more like technical sort of perspective. And then I'll go through sort of the fighting walkthrough of how I go through high tiered fights, especially in like a tournament type setting. And then also sum up with some like key things to keep in mind. So first off, when it comes to like advanced versus basics, basics is really like your core fundamentals, how you throw shots, how you block, how you move, right? These sort of things, these are what I kind of think of as mechanical sort of concepts. You should be able to have muscle memory when it comes to these things. Okay. Going a tier higher, intermediate sort of fighting concepts, this is where I sort of think about things in terms of the mental capacity within the game, within the fight. So thinking about your combat computer, how you process shots, what's coming in, what's going out, how you adapt to your individual opponents, right? The way that I fight Sean versus I fight any one of you here today, or how I fight like other warlords, okay? As well as other intermediate concepts is thinking about like Sean going to your guard, right? Reading what Sean is projecting, what information I can get from just looking at Sean. I can tell that he has very bad footwork by his stance. And it's on his hat. Right? But the sort of like mental aspects of the fight is where I think about like intermediate level stuff. And then advanced is, of course, the mastery of the basics. Really, when I talk about advanced anything, it's just doing the basics really well. As well as beginning to incorporate the mental aspects within the game or within the fight to your core fundamentals that you've mastered, and then tying everything together so you can sort of build plans and tailor your fighting style or the fight to each individual opponent. So one thing that I always like to say is every fighter has, their core sort of like 4 to 6 shots that they really love, right? Like it's this straight chop. I really like this shot, right? Or that shot. I'm hitting you really hard.
I know.
But taking those 4 to 6 shots that you like to use, but then beginning to tailor them in different ways to each of your opponents to begin to like take advantage of their weaknesses, for example. What else? A lot of the advanced concepts, as well as building the mental strategy, assessing your opponent, and then building your sort of like chess game that you're going to fight against them. And then additionally, building upon the mechanics and the instincts that you've built over mastering base shots, base movement, base blocks, to be able to like create plans not just in the start of the fight where we're out here, but in the grind we're like, oh, what am I gonna do? That sort of stuff. Okay. So I just wanted to point that out to sort of put a framework on how I view the differences between advanced sort of fighting and more basic levels of fighting. So if you go back and watch my basics videos about any of the fighting styles, it's really focused on more the core fundamental mechanics, whereas now this will be a little bit more of sort of a like assessment and more nitty-gritty sort of in the fight sort of things. Before going forward, I want to talk about some key concepts for Florentine in advanced settings. These are skills and aspects that I think are really important if you want to excel in Florentine. So first off, range control, because if you can't control the range of the fight, then, I mean, yeah, single is also very similar. If Sean can always control when I'm coming in or when he's going to come into fight, if he controls that better than I can, he will always win, because I almost never get to choose when I can hit him. He always gets to choose. So then that makes it very difficult. Additionally, within range control, thinking about positioning. So if positioning is not only where my body is relative to Sean in a range control aspect, but it's also like where our guard is. So if, for example, pick a guard. If you're going to pick that guard, go over here. So in this sort of guard, thinking about where my equipment is relative to Sean's equipment. If I choose something like this, right, this is a very different sort of dynamic in how the fight's going to work out than if I choose this sort of guard. And the reason being is my equipment is blocking different lanes and different openings to Sean, whether I'm like this or if I'm like this. Okay? So those are important things to think about in terms of positioning. Also, positioning goes into when you're actually in the fight, you're doing the exchange, and I like get off step here, and now if I'm here, I have to move this way, and that like movement gives me a moment of weakness, and then Sean could like counter and take advantage, and I could lose the fight. It's actually really unfortunate when you lose because of a misstep. How's that feel? Yeah. Okay. Additionally, lanes. Lanes are really important as well, because you think about it, you have two swords, right? Concept of a lane is you have the outside lane. Go back. You have the outside lane, outside of the swords. Inside lane, inside of the swords. So this is really important if somebody takes like this sort of stance, a very like inline stance, because now you can easily access the outside of their arms, especially if it's directly like this. If there's any cant in the swords, you now begin to like block the lane. So, I like to talk about lanes as well. As outside lane is where you go for the arm snipes. Inside lane is where you go for the body shots, right? This is a kill, this is a maim, right? And now if I do an arm snipe, I get the arm snipe. Okay, shot. There it goes. Now, what Sean has to do after that, Sean's now wounded. This is now a very different fight. Whereas if I had just stabbed him and he died. But concept of lanes and understanding how the geometry and what you have accessible is really important. And we'll work through this a little bit when I get into the walkthrough portion. Reading and assessments, very, very important, right? Because what I kind of alluded to earlier, if going to a stance, right? This stance, very bad. Don't do this stance. Oh my God, I'm going to hit you so hard. Okay, right. But depending on my ability to just step into a fight, look at what my opponent is projecting, what information they're giving to me, seeing how they respond. If I go like that and Sean only blocks, if Sean never throws at me when I do like an opener or a soft shot, then that more or less means that I have right of way. I get like a freebie, right? So if it's, I didn't drop them. if I can like always get Sean to open, I can come in on the inside, boom, or tag the arm, stuff like that. Okay, fakes, feints, and baits. These are always advanced sort of concepts, but I don't think they're necessarily super useful in Florentine because there's already so much going on. In single sword and sword and board, where you only have one sword to keep track of with an opponent, fakes are really, really beneficial, okay? But when it comes to Florentine, I don't really get a lot of mileage out of doing fakes and feints. Now, I'll do little pumps, but big fakes and body feints aren't as helpful because there's too much to keep track of. Because, which if my opponent just happens to be looking at the wrong sword at the wrong time when I do the fake and they don't get a response, then that's a really great way for me to die. Check out my styles video. Okay, setups also super important. Setups build really heavily into reading and assessments. Because that's how you're going to build your plan and execute your plan. And then I think stabs, if you are really good at stabbing in Florentine, you will, you will excel really well, especially if you can vary your stabs in a variety of different ways. Because the thing about Florentine, when it comes, like, in comparison to, say, sword and board, there's not a lot of passive defense area. Everything has to be active defense. And look at that. There's all this open space. So if I could stab Sean right through that gap, through this gap, through that gap, right? There's all of these different angles that I could stab my opponent, and they have to actively be aware of that, right? So one of my favorite things to do is boom, or sidestep, right? These, if you can stab and you're good at it, and you can do the setups really well in Florentine, it'll take you very far away. Okay. Also, one last thing to think about when it comes to Florentine is sort of the course of the fight and how things are sort of determined based off of like different actions, okay? So in single sword, I believe that within a single sword fight, the fight sort of is determined, like the outcome is pretty much already determined within the first 1 to 2 sort of shots or steps, engaging actions, in other words, of the fight, right? So like if we're single sword, you know, something like this, that's a big pump, boom, that's 2 actions. Or if instead it's something like that, or high, low, right? It's, single sword is very fast. It's very like quick. The time scale of the fights are super short, and the immediate, like, initial reactions of an engagement pretty much always determine the outcome, or like the outcome is almost deterministic because of that, especially depending on how hard your opponent bites. Now with Florentine, it's very similar to single sword because you have just swords, but you now have another sword that acts as an additional blocking or striking surface. So it is very high speed, like single sword, but with the additional piece of equipment, it helps elongate that time scale. And so it's not the first 1 to 2 shots, maybe it's like, or actions, it's the second to third, maybe fourth action that determines what's going to happen, right? Because like a lot of it will be out here, step in, oh, Sean decided to move very far over, I can now block, stab, right? That's sort of 3 actions. Also, Sean never responded to me, so if Sean, you know, I stepped here, you're supposed to.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm bad at the game.
Yeah, clearly. So, like, if you throw a shot, Okay, now I have to go here. Boom, right? There's more steps that have to happen to get an opening that I can get like a clean kill. Now, this doesn't matter for the course of this class, but thinking beyond Florentine and comparing to Sword and Board kind of relies on like the 5th or 6th shot that happens, or like the 5th or 6th action, because you now have this like big active surface area that you have to work around, and getting that to move, and all of the fakes and baits and the pumps and all of that matter a lot to be able to get your opponent to respond and get a kill. But we don't really care about the Sword and Board right now, nor necessarily single sword. We're here for Florentine, and just the reason why I talk about that is to sort of give an idea of like the different spans between the different categories. Okay, so now this is the part where you've all been waiting for, the fighting walkthrough. So in this part of the class, I'm going to be talking about like sort of, I'll have Sean go through different stances, different guards, you know, and we'll sort of walk through the way that I think about planning in a Florentine setting to sort of build my win in different aspects. So the first part, when it comes to engaging in Florentine at like higher levels, you always need to do like an initial read and an assessment, right? So every time, especially in like a tournament setting, we walk up into our match, you know, especially like a best 2 out of 3, or even in pits, my opponent walks up. All right, we tap. What do you do? All right, so freeze frame. Right, okay. Sean takes this guard. I need to be able to read, just rotate like perpendicular. Right, I need to be able to see what Sean has available. This arm is extended a little far, in my opinion. It's fine, but right, this is a really nice target. I would say, in my opinion, this sword is a little low. It doesn't fully protect his shoulder, but it really exposes this part of his shoulder or his body. So that's also a good target. And depending on how I play the rest of this out, I could maybe get like Sean's hip, depending on how he responds and how strongly he responds. Okay, you can move. But things to look at is, right, the guard. So go back into whatever guard. Just choose one. Okay, right. So if Sean chooses this guard versus the cross guard,
What?
We got to do so much work.
Yeah, we do.
Right, versus the cross guard. This is, again, this like changes how I plan the fight. Additionally, one thing that we haven't gotten to, we've only been looking at the hands. With Florentine, you can flip up the feet now. In single sword, this hasn't really been much of an issue, because if you fight, like, you always fight more or less sword foot forward. If you fight non-sword foot forward in single sword, it's clearly like, there's clearly like a bait or something like that going on. Whereas now, because Florentine has this unique level of symmetry within the fight, if you go other foot forward, right, this changes a lot of what I have access to. Now, granted, Sean's legs are stiff, and that would be very bad for him, and his hips are squared to me. But if he had a better stance, right, right, that sort of stance changes what I have access to. So now I have better access to that arm, or maybe I could go on the underside, but I would have to like drop for that shot. So depending on what his guard is, changes what I have access to. And the other thing that's also really important is, so if you're in that guard and I step in and he changes guard, yeah, I mean, that wasn't what I had in mind, but this also works. This actually works fine. right? So actually, this is a bad spot for me because, yeah, the main point is Sean has blocked both of my pieces of equipment with this one sword, which is actually a huge thing to do in Florentine. If you can get one piece of equipment to block both of your opponent's pieces of equipment, you kill them, easy peasy, nice and squeezy. Go have some lemonade. Okay, going back to guard, one thing to think about is whether or not they're hand matched, right? So what does hand match mean? Hand match means when our hands on the same side are matching, right? I kind of don't like this terminology because if you just said it to somebody, I would think, oh, hand match, so left sides. But that's not how it works. I don't know, I didn't come up with it, but it makes sense if you don't think about it. But anyway, so this means hand match, right? Our hands are the same side is protruding outward, in my perspective. What I have available is different versus in this hand match situation versus the non-hand match situation. Additionally, another thing to think about is, like, Peter the Quick has this sort of concept, or he's kind of put this out there saying that the hand matched alternative, let's go hand match on this side. Whoever has, like, it comes down to more or less like a 50-50% chance that whoever gets like the sword on the outside will win the engagement or whatever that like counter strike is. Whereas if we're not hand matched, so if you flip, it now becomes like a 75-25% chance because now it's whoever can get over on the cross, right? Or under, depending on what the shot is. I don't typically get into those like deep nitty-gritty details, but I prefer hand-matched fights because personally for me, I'm a right-handed fighter. Most people, when they step into a fight, they're going to lead with their dominant hand, which Sean is right-handed, so Sean pretty much always steps forward with his right hand. I'm left-handed, or I'm not left-handed, right? But I will still lead with my left hand because I think about Florentine as sort of like in a boxing sort of context where this is my jab, this is my power. This is where I'm setting everything up here, right? I'm keeping Sean at bay. I'm getting his equipment to move, blah, blah, blah. This is the killing blow. This is actually where I want to hurt Sean. Or this is what I want to hurt Sean with in a consensual way, everybody. Right? Because if I can get, well, also if I can just tag Sean's arm, maybe he doesn't get killed and he blocks, boom, right? This is where I'm going to be able to throw power to break through shots, or break through guards, stuff like that. But seeing the hand match, the reason why I go into it is really important because it determines how the fight can proceed. Okay, placement of the guards. You can have the same guard, high versus low. What is available in these two different guards, even though it's the same guard, or two different placements, same guard, right? It's this, I call it like a neutral guard. What I'm protecting is very different versus here. And what I have to do to get a shot off, if I'm down here and I want to go for like a stab, this is really easy, right? Whereas if I'm here and I want to go for a stab, I now have to go down and in, right? But rather, switch me sides. If I have the tall, really quick, since different change of perspective, so tall, I have to go down and in, but if I'm up tall, I can stab in this way. So I have different things available to me, depending on whether I'm low or high, but it also changes if I'm low or high compared to what Sean has, right? I think this is where Florentine becomes like really fun in 1v1s in the setups, because everything sort of changes depending on the starting conditions. And that's why when you watch like high tier Florentine fighters, they're like doing all of this shit. They're not trying to look cool. They're actually trying to scope things out. Okay. And I already talked about stance with the footwork. Okay. Now, let's say you have assessed the guards, assessed the stance. You kind of starting to understand the nuance between, you know, setting up your guard relative to your opponents and their placements and their stances and everything. You now need to sort of build a plan. Okay. For starters, I always like to try to keep one piece of equipment between my opponent's two pieces of equipment at all points in time within an engagement. So typically, stop it. So we typically start out here, right? We're in C range, far away from each other. I can't hit Sean. Sean can't hit me. Okay, Sean's gonna stick with that guard. I want to try to set up the fight to where I can block both pieces of equipment. So if I could come in here, right, I now have everything blocked off. Boom. Done. That's very simplified. But keeping these pieces of equipment, now granted, it's very rarely ever this clean. But if I throw, oh, okay, I die, or I throw, boom. Okay, now you're armed. What are you gonna do? Chop, right? It's the other thing with Florentine when I'm fighting is each arm sort of has its own go. It has its own turn, in a sense. I'm very rarely. I do that like once a tournament as a funnies, and if I get the kill, it's great. But otherwise, like, I don't do it. Okay, to build a plan, what else do you need to do? You need to be able to pull out information, because if you go into this fight, okay, Sean has this guard. I already kind of talked about guards will change depending on what is being thrown, or, you know, how Sean wants to fight. So if I step here, Sean moves his guard over. If I go here, what are you going to do? Okay. Boom. Something like that. But also teasing out information in the aspect of how does Sean fight? How does Sean respond to blocks or respond to shots? He blocks, and then does he counter? Does he just straight block? How is his movement? If I step in, Sean stays stagnant. Okay, that's actually a really good piece of information, because now I can control when I'm going to fight, when the fight's going to happen. This is the range control aspect. If Sean backs up, oh, okay, now that's different. But how does he respond to different steps? If I take this little half step, this isn't really a half step, it's more of a creeping step. If I creep, how far can I creep before he realizes, oh, I'm in danger, right? Big steps, little steps, stepping offline. How does he respond, right? These sort of things you can begin to assess and pull information in how your opponent responds to stimulus. Because if you know how they respond to different stimuli, you can sort of build a plan on you can identify things that they're weak at and areas that you're stronger than them in, and then build a plan on capitalizing on those aspects. Okay. Additionally, thinking about openers. I hope they can't hear the train. Okay. Openers, right? We should switch to this side. So, an opener, the entire concept of an opener is I am trying to throw a single relatively safe shot. I'm really out of range. I'm not actually trying to hit Sean, or I'm not trying to maim Sean, injure him, but I'm trying to see how he responds. So this is a pretty safe opener because I'm protecting my arm and I'm only hitting his hand. But what does he do? How does he respond? Does he just take the shot and block 100%? Or does he counter? Okay, well, now that was bad for me because I got tagged on that. But that's a good piece of information to know. Because if Sean is very adamant about countering every single time, boom, you know, you can begin to sort of assess like, oh, I want to counter his counter. Right? Does that make sense? What else? You can also do this by doing pumps, where I'm like here, I'm not throwing a shot, I'm just acting like I'm going to throw a shot. How hard does he go to block that? Because if I see the response is really large, I can maybe go catch him on the inside or something like that. Okay, what else? Okay, say you get all of this information. Now it's time to sort of reassess on everything and sort of begin to pick out the bits and pieces that you may be good at, the identifying the weak points of your opponent, as well as identifying the strong points. Is their hand speed really, really fast? Are they really, really great at moving around you? Or are you better at them than that? Are they really aggressive? How good are they at blocking and striking? What is the quality of their blocks themselves? Because if they have, the reason why I bring up quality of blocks is if they don't divert enough emphasis into a block, you can sometimes just power through the block by throwing a harder shot. For example, so I'm going to throw on this side. That was bad. Right, okay. I hit Sean's arm. Now actually block the shot. Okay, I didn't. That was a pretty devoted shot, or devoted block. Now, if you only like half block it, okay, now block it more. The same. Now I'm gonna throw hard, but do the same block. Right? If I can devote more strength, it requires more commitment. But if I notice my opponent isn't devoting a huge quantity of attention to the blocks, then sometimes I can get them on, like, what do you call it? Without them noticing, or without them, like, catching up on it. Another thing to think about, just since it's on my mind and talking about it, you can play with the magnitude of the variation. Oh, so, you know, I'm throwing real hard. Boom, boom, boom. And so they're going to devote really hard to these blocks. And then you go, boop. You pump, you fake in that aspect, or on that side, and then you catch them on the inside, right? Because they have to, the more they devote into the block, the more they have to, like, they devote more resources and provide a different angle that exposes them. Okay. Going back to reassessing, are they a stagnant fighter? Are they dynamic? Are they moving around a bunch, right? Are they using all of the field space? Are they switching their stance? Are they more in just a singular stance? These sort of things to sort of think about. And then really, if you can identify areas that you clearly outmatch them on, those are the aspects that you want to try to take the most advantage of, right? Because that's your strong suit. You want to play to your strengths. You don't want to give your opponent your weaknesses, right? Because you want to win, and you want them to lose, not the other way around. Okay. Also thinking about reassessing and building a plan. In Florentine, you kind of have two sort of options. You could kind of whittle them down, where I'm going to arm snipe them. I want to just tag. I want to wound Sean or my opponent and then kill him, right? If I wound Sean, I wasn't, okay, I wound Sean. Drop the sword! Right, now this is a very different fight compared to the Florentine fight. Because I could, boop, I could leg him, I could come in, stab. I have one less piece of equipment to worry about. Or instead, I could go for, pick up the other sword. Instead of a whittle down arm sniping approach, I could instead go for something where I'm going for a kill shot. So that's going to take a little bit more of a workup or a setup for it. Where, okay, I'm going to come over here, boop, boop, stab. I'm typically, when I'm trying to go for big kill shots, I'm going to like throw an opener, or I'm going to throw a very strong cross chop or something that I can blow through my opponent's guard. That's typically how I think about that. So it's kind of your choice, what you like to do, what feels more comfortable to you. Arm sniping, I think, is a very, very valid and great strategy within Florentine. But if you want to do arm sniping, what you end up having to do, switch your stance, you have to be able to control this distance really well. Because once your opponent take a half step forward, I have to go for a wider angle now to get the arm, but now Sean can hit me in the body. There you go. Nice. Right, so if you can't control that spacing very well, it becomes a little hard. All right, let's see. Now once you decide your target, right, whatever. Also, when it comes to Florentine, I don't pick one singular target of like, I want to stab Sean right here and only right here. It's more of like, okay, that would be a great spot, but I typically have like one or two options in mind. And where I go from that in building my setup, constructing the setup, is switch your stance. Like your feet. There you go. Just so people can see this part of your body easier. So if I like looking at this, Sean's arm right here is accessible. Right here is accessible. This hip is accessible. Let's say Sean really likes to block up top. If I throw this, he responds really hard to it. Then maybe this hip is actually what I want to kill him with. But what I'll do is I will begin to work the clock in a sense where, okay, I'll throw out here, get that response, up, stab, right? But that's this hip. And then maybe if he's able to block that hip stab, then I come in. You thought I was going to hit you in the junk, huh? Yeah. Yeah. Right, but that I use each one of my primary targets were shot locations that I threw for, right? And so every shot that you typically throw in Florentine is pretty real for me, at least. I don't do that many fakes, as I said earlier, but everything that I throw is a viable target. It's my prime targets. I don't want to be throwing at something that I don't think that I'm going to be able to hit. Does that make sense? Right. Okay. And then once you have your plan, execute your plan. Make sure also while you're building your plan and the areas that you're going to throw at, you have in mind of what's going to be open to you, because it's not like this scenario where I just get to hit Sean, right? Sean technically is supposed to be able to hit me back. But knowing the weak points, right? Because if I okay, boom, throw up here, stab, and then now I want that hip. This is very different compared to how I do this, right? What the difference is in the positioning. From here, I blocked shot. That's a terrible block.
It works.
Okay, right. But now, what do I have? I'm super exposed on my back. Ah, I'm dead, right? Whereas if instead, we're up here, I come here, and you block, and now you throw, I could do something like that. Now, granted, we're going step by step by step, so it's not as like organic. But understanding how you throw and where you throw, what you can get tagged with, and where you could lose is important. So once you have your plan, execute it. You win, you lose, cache whatever information that you can. Adjust, like reassess. You know, start at the top, rinse and repeat. And that's kind of how I go through all of my fights, especially in tournament settings, or if we're doing 1v1 spars. I'm reading what my opponent has. I see what guards. Okay, I go into a guard. How do they change? Oh, they change their guard. I do this guard. Okay, whatever. All right, I want to hit that spot. How am I going to do it? Throw here, step, stab. Something like that. I get it. I win. Okay, great. Let's try it again. Let's see how many times I can repeat it. I fail. All right, how do I get that stab to work, or how do I hit that area, but get it to work on the next skill? Things to keep in mind within Florentine itself is the symmetry. There's a lot of symmetry here. 2 swords, right? Split the body in half. It's the same. This is virtually the same as this, right? The feet are different, but it's just a mirror, right? And so symmetry is really important, but you can also then begin to think about asymmetry. And that's where we get into something like this, or I do this, right? We're now in the non-hand match case, which I didn't really talk a huge quantity amount. But what I have available is very different. That was really bad. This stab is really easy now for me because Sean's chest is open in this way, right? So Sean would have to be very conscientious about that. So playing with that symmetry, playing with the asymmetry, really, really powerful. As well as doing the stance shifts. So if I'm here, and I go here, as I'm stepping in, right, if Sean builds his entire plan against me in this guard, and then I step in and I switch, it's now very different. And look at that. I've blocked that whole lane from him. That's what he did to me as well. Think about your stab geometry. In this angle, or like in this setup, I could stab him here. I could stab him here. I could stab him here, right? If I can get that stab, now granted, this isn't like super great because, yeah, it puts my equipment down. This isn't a strong structure. My arm is exposed. But if you can be able to stab anywhere like in here, this is a lot of variability. You can also stab down and up, right? And then you get to do it on both sides. So if you can control that really well, that'll put you a leg up. Okay, what else? Other thing to think about within Florentine is the concept of like taking turns that I kind of describe in fighting single sword and board doesn't apply here, right? Normally in like single sword, okay, I throw, now you throw. It's this sort of like block strike sort of aspect. It doesn't apply in Florentine because now, yeah, we both tagged our chests. Right, but just because I throw doesn't mean Sean can't throw at the same time, right? So you have to keep that in mind. In single sword, if you have like really good tempo, you could like break timing, and that works really well. But if you've ever just listened to a Florentine Kingdom level fight, there's no tempo. It's just like, and that's because nobody's taking turns. Everybody's throwing shots the whole time. So that's sort of like the framework that I think about. Hopefully that's helpful. I am going to go through a couple of examples if people are interested, just for different like shot locations, different guards. So what guard are you going to go into? All right, switch me sides. Right, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assess what Sean has available. Sean's his right foot and right arm is projected out. His arm, from what I can see, is exposed a little bit. So if you honestly, we're going to teach him a little bit right here. If you just angle this sword just a wee bit. Oh, look at that. Now I can't get it. Right? So if you go back to where you were, and all that would be in this setup, no, go back. We would be here, take a half step. That's all I would throw. That's all I would throw. In this arrangement, I would be planning to arm snipe him with just this pop and see what I get. But now if you switch up, okay, I can't get that as well. But what I will do is, I see a big opening here. This is projected a little far out for me. But what I do know is that it's not, yeah, he's sort of like emphasizing the stab, but he's not protecting his inside arm. So if I throw out and he doesn't adjust this sword, then he's going to expose that arm because of how far you had it projected out. That sword, right? Boom. Something like that. Or you could go up. This upshot, I don't like these upshots a bunch because it's not as powerful. But some people are really good if you can get it off. Superb. But, okay, go back to the guard. Like, yeah, there you go. Okay, so if I can get, I'm still going to probably throw on this outside to pull the guard over. Say Sean brings that guard over. I can step forward with this stab. I can throw, come on the inside. Or I could throw the flat wrap to get the chest, depending on, as well as if I throw this jab, I'm going to assess where he is. How does he respond? Okay, he doesn't do anything. He doesn't even move. It's like he's my dummy. Right? Okay, so then if I can see that he just opens his hip all the time, that was his leg. Right? Or maybe I pump, throw. I said we don't use fakes. I lied, I guess. There's always exceptions to every rule. Choose a different stance. Actually, no, go back to that stance. Sorry. So those are a lot of variations that I have from this guard. But now from this guard, right? One thing that I like about this cross guard is that I'm already set up to block both pieces of equipment by just throwing my sword out, or I can step in, right? And I'm already halfway there. Boom. Right? But from here, depending if Sean has the low guard, which he kind of has, or the low placement, but if instead he has a higher placement, I can throw on the inside. And all I got to do is I just lean forward with that, right? When we get to higher level fighting, it's not purely just, okay, I'm going to take a step and I'm going to throw. It's these little minutia sort of things where, okay, I can't get him here, I'm going to get him here. See, all I'm doing is this, like, 4-inch adjustment with my knee to get range, right? Let me see how long he just lets me hit him. Right, but these sort of like little things, these are the differences between winning and losing. Well, okay, from here, if I still do this same sort of approach, he doesn't do anything, maybe one day he'll counter. You're not gonna counter? Okay. Right. I can get the inside of the arm that way. I can stab him. There's a lot of variability. Typically with my forward arm, I'm always gonna initiate. I don't really initiate with this front arm, unless I'm just trying to block his equipment on the inside. Now change your guard. Okay. All right. So if I still stay in this guard, the same thing still applies. If I'm really strong, which I'm not, I could blow through the guard and hit him in the chest at the same time. But I don't think I'm that strong. Let's try it. Okay, we're doing this one now? Okay. So if we're in this guard, this, not a good matchup against this, right? Because, okay, I can block this, but there's the underside, and she has the same thing against me. Yeah, there you go. Right? There's this, but there's not a lot. I can do that, but now I'm crisscrossed. If it was me, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I would adjust to something like this, or I would adjust if I wanted to stay with the offhand match, something like that. I could go on forever doing this because this is like the nuance of fighting when it comes to higher levels. But really what you should be taking away from sort of advanced fighting is have strong fundamentals, like know how to throw good chops, know how to throw good flat wraps, know how to move. When you do these things, you shouldn't having to be thinking about the movement or about the shot or the block. A lot of the mechanical parts should be instinctual almost. But the planning part and sort of identifying your opponent's weaknesses and integrating all of that together to build a plan and set everything up, that's where you begin to transcend from like a medium tier fighter to a high tier fighter. But yeah, hopefully that was helpful. I know I've just been on my soapbox for, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 minutes. But that's all I have for today. Of course, happy to help anybody here, as well as like hit me up in the YouTube comments. So let's go practice some Florentine, guys. But all right, thanks, and I'll see you on my next installment on my Newb to Warlord series. Thanks, Sean.